Now to face the armholes. And these facings are prepared just like the neckline facings. First, stay stitched. Then the lower edge turned under and stitched. The right and left armhole facings are put on in two different ways because the zipper is going in on the left side and extends clear up to the armhole. Janice will do the left armhole facing first. At the start, the work is just the same as it was on the neckline facing. And as you can see, she has already stitched it around the armhole, trimmed and clipped the seam, and top stitched the facing to the press seam. The next step on this is to stitch the facing to the bodice on the front underarm, taking a 5/8 inch seam. Then on the back underarm, the facing is stitched to the bodice in a 1/2 inch seam. You'll see the reason for the different widths when you put the zipper into the placket. Now the corners of these and the seams trimmed. Then the facing is turned to the inside and pressed. And tacked at the shoulder to the neckline facing. The right armhole facing just like the neckline facing. Stitched on around the armhole, the seam trimmed, clipped, and pressed toward the facing, and then the facing stitched to the seam. Now, with the facing end pulled out at the underarm, just as was done on the shoulder seam, the right underarm seam is pinned and stitched. Starting on the facing and stitching all the way to the waistline. This seam is then pressed open, the facing turned inside and tacked to the underarm seam and to the neckline facing at the shoulder. So now the bodice unit is completed and Janice is ready to work on the skirt unit. She'll start by stay stitching the skirt front waistline. It is not necessary to stay stitch the left side placket opening as was done on the bodice because this skirt is cut with the fabric at the sides. But because the center front and center back are cut on the bias, when you make this jumper, you should only baste those two seams and let the skirt hang overnight before stitching them. Then if the basted seams draw, clip the basting and allow them to drop before stitching them. However, we're not going to do that in our demonstration because we don't want to keep you here all night. So Janice just pinned the center seam of the skirt front and now stitches it from the bottom to the top, the direction that is with the grain. Next, she presses the finished seam open in the same direction, from bottom to top. After stay stitching the waistline of the skirt backs, Janice then joined the center back seam and the right side seam and pressed them open. Now she is joining the left side seam, but this is stitched from the bottom only as far as the notch, to leave an opening for the zipper. After pressing the left side seam open, the next step is to join skirt and bodice. Following her primer directions, she first clips the skirt waistline to the stay stitching. Then, with the bodice over the skirt so outsides are together, she pins the two pieces matching the notches, the side seams, the center fronts, and the center backs. Next, she stitches the pinned skirt and bodice together. And presses the seam up onto the bodice. Then on the outside, she top stitches close to the seam line through the bodice and the pressed up seam. Now let's just review joining the skirt and bodice again. First, clip the skirt waistline to the stay stitching. Second, with outsides together, pin bodice and skirt, matching notches, side seams, center fronts, center backs. Third, stitch the seam and press it up. And fourth, top stitch. And now all that's left to do is put in the zipper and hem the jumper. To prepare for putting in the zipper, Janice first pressed to the inside the 5/8 inch seam allowance on the front edge of the placket. Then on the back edge of the placket, she pressed 1/2 inch to the inside. She is going to use a white zipper so you can see it clearly. The closed zipper is placed face up against the seam allowance of the back placket, with the bottom of the chain at the bottom of the placket opening. You can either pin or baste the placket to the zipper tape, easing the fabric to the tape. Janice will pin at the bottom and then just below the waistline seam. Then she turns down the top of the zipper tape, turning it toward the jumper fabric, and pins the top of the placket to the tape. She has removed the presser foot from the machine and put on the zipper foot to make her stitching easier. Now, with the zipper open for about 2 inches, she starts stitching the placket edge to the tape. She closes the zipper when she has stitched down to where it was open and continues to the bottom of the placket. When the back edge is finished, pull up the zipper tab and pin or baste the front edge of the placket to the tape, lapping the front edge 1/8 inch over the back. And be sure the waistline seam lines up on both sides of the placket. Starting at the top of the placket, about 3/8 of an inch from the edge, stitch down to the bottom. Then, with the needle in the fabric, lift the zipper foot and pivot the work on the needle. Then stitch across the bottom to the skirt seam line. This is the way the placket looks with the zipper in. At the top, you sew on a small hook and eye. Next, have an even length from the floor marked on your skirt. Then put in your hem. You can finish off the hem edge in different ways, depending on the material you use. On cotton, you could turn under the raw edge, stitch it, and slip stitch the turned edge to the skirt, like this. On jersey or heavy tweed, a good finish is to make a row of stitching about 1/2 inch from the edge, and then pink the edge and catch stitch it to the skirt, like this. On light wools or rayon or silk, a nice finish is to stitch bias seam tape to the edge and hem the tape to the skirt, like this. When the hem is finished, so is the jumper, except for a final light pressing. Now, wouldn't you like to see the finished jumper? Of course you would. And here it is, on the same 4 girls you saw before. Don't you agree that it is very becoming to all of them? 3 of the jumpers are shown just as you saw it made, but the one worn with the black sweater has pockets on the skirt. You can put them on or not, just as you like. Don't you think anybody could make a jumper like that? It's so easy to do. I know you'll find it so if you just follow the simplicity system of sewing and get into that smooth sewing rhythm. Now, would you like to see some other kinds of jumpers that fit beautifully into a smart, modern Miss wardrobe? This plaid gingham has that fashionable long torso look. The pattern number is 1222, easy to remember and easy to make. This blue check looks ready for a date with its filmy organdy blouse. It's pattern number 1010. And doesn't this red velveteen have a look of elegance? It's the same pattern as the first one you saw in plaid gingham, number 1222. But doesn't it look different? These jumpers, too, you'll find very easy to make if you just do what your Simplicity printed pattern tells you to do.